Can a country be a country if you don't actually control your territory? And what if you have full control, but the world still refuses to recognize you? Somalia is a member of the United Nations, but for years it lacked a functioning government and couldn't enforce its own authority, even in its capital. Taiwan, on the other hand, has a government, a military, and is a thriving democracy, but many countries don't officially acknowledge it as a state. These contradictions point to one of the most important and complicated concepts in international relations: sovereignty. Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm Noah Zerbe. I'm a professor of international relations at California State Polytechnic University Humboldt, and in this video we're going to explore what sovereignty really means, how it works in theory and in practice, and why it matters in today's global landscape. In international relations, states are defined by their sovereignty. What that means is that a state has supreme decision-making authority within a given territory. It's capable of enforcing its decisions over that territory, and that population generally accepts those decisions. Although modern sovereignty is often associated with the 1648 Peace of Westphalia and is thus sometimes referred to as Westphalian sovereignty, the concept itself evolved over time and was more clearly defined by later theorists and legal practices. We explore this connection in greater detail in another video. The idea of sovereignty is central to the concept of statehood. Indeed, Chapter 1 of the United Nations Charter affirms the sovereign equality of states and maintains that nothing should authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, or shall require members to submit such matters to settlement under the present charter. This effectively means that sovereignty shields the domestic affairs of any state from external intervention. Seen from this light, sovereignty might thus be thought of as having both an external and an internal dimension. Internally, sovereignty addresses two key questions. First, do the people view the state as sovereign? That is, do the people accept rule by the government? Note that this does not necessarily mean that the state is democratic or just. Many states rely on military or police apparatuses to enforce decisions on the people. Thus, we might think of this as the people accepting or acquiescing to the rule of the state. Relatedly, does the state have the capacity to deliver the political goods? That is the state able to provide the services we normally associate with a state? Can it build infrastructure and maintain it? Can it deliver social services, maintain law and rule of order, and do all the other things we normally associate with statehood? To the extent that it's able to deliver these kinds of political goods, the state is said to have sovereignty. Externally, other states must recognize the state's right to rule over its territory. This is connected to the constitutive theory of statehood that we considered in an earlier video, and is most frequently represented through diplomatic recognition or through membership in the United Nations. We also often distinguish between de facto and de jure sovereignty, or between sovereignty in fact and sovereignty of law. In many developing countries, the capacity of the state to enforce its decisions or to deliver the goods expected of a state is limited. These states are often said to have juridical sovereignty, meaning that sovereignty is legally recognized by other states, even if it's not expansive on the ground. This is particular too in regions where central governments struggle to exert control, like the Waziristan region, a tribal area along the Pakistani-Afghan border. Although Waziristan is officially part of Pakistan, the state's historically struggled and had limited ability to enforce its authority there due to a combination of rugged terrain, strong tribal governance, and periodic insurgency. In such cases, the state may possess de jure sovereignty, its authority is recognized under international law, but it lacks de facto sovereignty, meaning its actual control on the ground is limited. Another case that illustrates the distinction between de facto and de jure sovereignty is Somalia. Following the ouster of the longtime president Mohamed Said Barre in Somalia in 1991, the country was plunged into a period of anarchy and conflict. Barre had ruled Somalia for 22 years. He had come to power in a military coup and developed Somalia into a close client state for the Soviet Union in Africa. The end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union brought Soviet support for the regime to an end, and a civil war in Somalia in 1991 saw the country's military fracture into a number of competing groups. Beginning in 1992, the United Nations authorized a series of interventions intended to bring stability and deliver humanitarian assistance to Somalia. This mission proved difficult, and U.S. support for the operation was terminated following the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, popularized in the movie Black Hawk Down, in which 19 Americans and an estimated 200 to 500 Somalis were killed in fighting between the United States and Somali militias led by General Mohammed Farah Aidid. Throughout much of the 1990s and into the early 2000s, Somalia was home to numerous conflicting warlord and pirate groups. The government was recognized by other states and by the United Nations, but was not able to rule, and indeed, for an extended period of time, was actually forced to operate in neighboring Kenya. Various militias claimed control of its physical territory, and pirate groups operated off its coasts, including the group that seized the merchant vessel Maersk Alabama, an incident popularized in the film Captain Phillips. During this period, Somalia did not have sovereignty in the most traditional and formal sense. But in a legal sense, the right of the government to make legally binding decisions over the territory of Somalia was still recognized by other states, even if that government was operating from another country and could not enforce its decisions on the ground in Somalia. Somalia, in other words, possessed juridical or de jure sovereignty, even if it lacked de facto sovereignty. This distinction between de facto and de jure sovereignty overlaps with the two dimensions of sovereignty. Internal sovereignty pertains to the state's relationship with its own population and its territory. It signifies that there is no higher authority than the state within its borders. The state possesses supreme and exclusive right to make and enforce decisions, adjudicate disputes, and command the obedience of its citizens and all those residing within its territorial jurisdiction, implying a hierarchy of organizing authority with the state at its apex. But sovereignty also has an external dimension, which concerns the state's relationship with other states and its status in the international arena, the recognition we previously discussed. External sovereignty denotes the state's independence from foreign control and its formal equality with other sovereign states. It means that the state has the right to manage its own affairs without external interference and to be recognized by other states as an autonomous actor capable of entering into treaties, sending and receiving diplomats, and generally participating in the community of states. This dual concept of sovereignty is foundational to the modern state system. It establishes the principle that states are autonomous units, internally supreme and externally independent, forming a society of equals, at least in legal terms, though in practice, vast disparities of power significantly influence their interactions. Before concluding, let's consider two contemporary questions regarding sovereignty. First, why does sovereignty still matter? Put simply, because states want it to. Perhaps not surprisingly, we often find states that weak de facto sovereignty are the most steadfast proponents and defenders of legal sovereignty in international forums. Thus, at the United Nations, we often find countries where de facto sovereignty is least well defined, most ardently defending their de jure sovereignty. This is an interesting paradox that we'll return to later in the course. But it's also a question at the heart of contemporary political movements like Indian nationalism or the British exit from the European Union, Brexit. And also in conflicts between the United States, China, and its neighbors in the South China Sea, or between the United States, Canada, and Russia in the Arctic, both regions where disputes over sovereignty and territorial claims are contested. That said, we can also ask whether or not sovereignty is becoming less relevant. I think it's clear that sovereignty is also increasingly challenged by contemporary global developments. Problems like pollution and climate change, the growing power of transnational corporations, and the ease of cross-border flows of information, money, and people have all strained traditional Westphalian conceptions of sovereignty. Many of the most pressing issues facing the world today, from pandemics to cybersecurity threats, cannot effectively be addressed by any single state acting alone. This has led some scholars to argue that sovereignty is becoming increasingly obsolete or limited in the face of globalization and global interdependence. States must now cooperate and coordinate policies on a wide range of issues that transcend national boundaries. International organizations, non-governmental organizations, and multinational corporations often wield influence rivaling or exceeding that of some states. As a result, the scope and nature of state sovereignty in the 21st century is hotly debated. And we see this debate over the limits of sovereignty reflected in the context of the responsibility to protect, or R2P doctrine. Briefly, R2P holds that state sovereignty is not absolute, but comes with a responsibility to protect one's own citizens from mass atrocities like genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. If a state is unwilling or unable to uphold this responsibility, the doctrine argues that the international community has the responsibility to protect the populations at risk, including through military intervention if necessary as a last resort. This challenges traditional Westphalian conceptions of sovereignty as absolute authority within a state's traditional borders. R2P asserts that sovereignty entails obligations and that a state's sovereign rights can be potentially superseded if it's manifestly failing to protect its populations. Critics view R2P as a violation of state sovereignty, while proponents argue that sovereignty should not be a shield for inaction in the face of mass atrocities. Sovereignty is one of the most foundational principles of international relations, but it's also one of the most contested. Today we see debates over sovereignty playing out on the world stage. Russia's invasion of Ukraine represents a direct challenge to Ukrainian territorial sovereignty and has sparked the largest war in Europe since World War II. In Syria, questions over sovereignty are central to the legitimacy of foreign interventions, whether from the United States, Russia, Turkey, or Iran. And in the South China Sea, China's maritime claims have brought it into conflict with neighboring states and US-led freedom of navigation exercises, raising questions about sovereignty over contested waters and islands. These cases show that sovereignty isn't just a legal status, it's a source of conflict, power, and negotiation. As we move deeper into the course, we'll return to these examples and others as we continue to explore how sovereignty shapes global politics in both theory and practice. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.